Kyle, Graham, and Mark, thank you so much for joining me again for a review of the third quarter Glass House results. I really appreciate it. Before we start, I want to give some disclosures. I am not a paid employee of Glass House. Occasionally, I will get a hat or some samples of weed from Graham. That is about it. I run my own private investment funds. And as always, please do your own due diligence and your own research because occasionally I'm wrong. And please do your own work. The reason I have these calls is because I find Glasshouse to be fascinating. Um, One of the reasons is that I've learned the hard way, and Graham especially has taught me as just how hard cultivation of cannabis flower, of high quality cannabis flower is. And as evidence for that, we look no further than the third quarter review of Curaleaf, who reported that they had a crop failure in Illinois. One of my favorite stories is, well, it wasn't its favorite now, but Air Wellness lost power for 4 hours. I think it was in 2023 in Florida and lost an entire quarter of production. And one of the things you find is that growing cannabis is like growing an apple without its skin, to use Graham's words. It's incredibly susceptible to mold, disease, and pests. And that's why it's really helpful to grow it in God's gift to the environment, which is Ventura County, California, where I believe Glasshouse has a unicorn of a facility run by an incredibly well managed and a great culture of a team who are just trying to grow cannabis at very low prices. And we're going to get into that. To the best quality that they can. And I think eventually you'll have a national market, and that very few companies or cultivators will be able to compete with Glasshouse's quality to price that they can deliver. And that's the reason I keep finding they're slowly turning on this state-of-the-art greenhouse. And it's fascinating to watch how California works, because California is kind of a mess, but it's still the biggest cannabis market. And it's fascinating to watch what they learn as they turn everything on. And just the last thing is, despite very low prices, they're still seeing, I think it was, you had 57% gross margins. That's very close to what MSOs have. And like, I think Florida Trulieve announced like a 61%. And there's very limited licenses in some of these states. So to announce a gross margin that is very similar, where you have cannabis flower pricing 3 to 5 times higher, is just an impressive feat. So we continue to dive in, and that's why I think Glasshouse is so fascinating. And that's my opening spiel. So thanks, guys, for reviewing again.
Thank you for
Thanks,
having us as always,
Aaron.
Aaron. How many in a row is this now?
Man, I don't know. I'd have to look. I don't know.
That many?
5, 6,
Yeah.
6,
Yeah.
7. I don't know.
Yeah, right. Which translated to years is almost 2 years of doing these with you now. So that's
yeah, that's right. That's right. I will have to look. I should have known. And I want to apologize for my voice. I was talking about this earlier. I just got back from the Georgia-Tennessee game, and I would like to think that my voice was one of the 90,000 that helped Georgia secure that important win. I can't be sure. It was really loud though. But anyway, so bear with me. I'm feeling fine. I just have a little bit of a scratchy voice. I want to dive back in. I just said a whole bunch of nice things about.
Why don't you apologize to everybody who went to college whose team is not Georgia and doing all that you're doing? Because the rest of us are like, oh, look at you, bragging away.
Well, we do have two losses this year. We're not perfect. We're not perfect. Two losses. So.
Not State.
Well,
what can we say?
Yeah. So let's dive in. One of the things I want to talk pricing. I was surprised to see the magnitude of the drop in pricing, especially considering I know that the licensed square foot capacity, just for everyone listening, the last time you had pricing anywhere near this, we experienced a wipeout of cultivation farms. And there's been something like 30 million square feet that have left the market. And I was surprised to see prices get down to where they are now. And you have forecast pricing of $195 to $200 a pound of biomass, which is, I think, versus 312 last year.
Yeah.
And it's about a 35-40% drop in pricing. And I just want to, what do you think is driving this price decline to these record low levels in California?
Let me go to 30,000 feet. Let me pass it to Graham, who has some pretty good anecdotal, and then Mark can get into licenses and things like that. You know, Aaron, when you have an illicit market and the legal market, you know, all sort of going together, and we don't have, at least Graham will probably have some decent anecdotal. You know, we hear these things of, well, hey, Oregon killed it. Great crops up there, Washington. And all cannabis sort of is fungible, meaning I have a barrel of cannabis that was grown legally, metric, at Glass House. If a neighboring farm or neighboring state had some biomass and we dump some in, how would anybody know how much, you know, how many pounds should be coming off that plant? And so what I would tell you is, I think this is a little bit of a product of the fact that we're still living in a federally illicit, you know, federally illegal Schedule I world. And because of that, you don't have proper interstate commerce where you can all of a sudden turn this much more into a commodity that goes nationwide. That's the future. So right now you've just got these imbalances that come and go, and it leaves a lot of speculation. And with that, let me give it to Graham from that 30,000 where it's like, it's really hard to know, other than that's what the market happens during this period. But go ahead, Graham.
Yeah, so following up on that, right? I think there's two ways to look at things, right? There's the macro level and the micro level, right? So on the macro level, not surprising at all. We fully expect there to continue to be cycles. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. That's what the path to normalization is going to look like. That's a lot of what the Glass House thesis is built on, right? A lot of the reason that you see us talk so much more about how much we grow, what we grow, how good it is, and what the costs are, or those are the things that we control, and those are the things that determine if you win in pricing cycles as they will continue to play out, right? So what we care about is how much do we grow, is it good quality, and did we do it at the industry leading cost so that we can give people the best value, right? And you saw that, I think, across the board in spades in Q3. On a micro level, we were, you know, somewhat surprised too, right? So we have the overall thesis, but we don't have a crystal ball. It's interesting for context that up through the first half of Q2, pricing was actually right on, actually slightly above what we were forecasting, right? So we were seeing better pricing than we expected, and then it started to dip, right? And I think it's interesting to see that the resolution or the narrowness of the time. It's also important to remember what was happening in that time frame. If you are an outdoor or full-term grower, or even if you're growing in hoops, you're making the decision whether or not you plant for the season in March, April, certainly not later than May. So if you think about what people see at the times that they're making that decision, pricing's stronger than we expected it to be, right? And so one of the things you mentioned, that the license is the square footage hasn't changed. We don't actually know the square footage. We know the license counts. But if someone has a 10-acre license, there's nothing that tells us if they planted 1 acre or 10 acres, right? So if you think about what happened last year, pricing was strong through 23. It was strong through the first almost half of 24. People, I mean, I have thesis, as Kyle mentioned, there's nowhere to go and find out if you're right. But theory is a bunch of people who had licensed acreage who may have planted less than they could have last year, saw the strong pricing in 23 and the first half of 24, planted a bunch, and then you start to see the replications of that. I do not think that people can survive. I think we're to the destructive levels again. I think, you know, the cure for low prices is low prices. And so I think what we're going through now is going to have another effect where you're going to see the a lot of people decide that this isn't the game they want to be in anymore.
Well, it's interesting because I started hearing from other companies that there was a little bit of price weakness in Oregon earlier this year. And then if I just think of the most competitive markets, and then Oregon had a great crop this
Yeah,
year,
plus
like
20,
conditions were just
20%
perfect.
over is some of the numbers we've heard. And I think even Northern California had a good season, right? It was dry,
Yes.
it
And
was
Michigan too. Michigan prices started falling this summer. And it was just interesting. You talk about that national market and that you don't know where cannabis is coming from or who, but it feels like there was this production jump in all the largest markets.
Mhm.
And this has maybe led to
Yeah,
a
we saw some
short-term
stats.
glut.
We saw some numbers out of Oregon that could have put it as much as 20% above normal, which is a significant amount for a state. We also see in the DCC data, even though the license count's flat, there's about 2 million more pounds that was produced. Now, maybe that was a great season, or maybe a bunch of farms that had licenses didn't actually quit growing, and you're seeing inversion where you have unlicensed, illegally grown product entering the legal system, or maybe people are just finally actually reporting numbers. It's hard to say what's going on. But in any case, front end of a cycle, we're taking a cautious footing. That's where you see our forecast is, we hope for the best at highest prices, but we plan for the worst. And so we want to be prepared for whatever may come. The last cycle was 12 to 18 months. Don't think this one's going to be that long, but we want to be ready for it in case it is. And again, the best quality at the lowest cost is a winner in every market.
And Aaron, I think it's important to say, we have heard stories from our sales team that, hey, a farm in Santa Barbara is like, they're just trying to get whatever cash they can to make payroll. So we're getting back to what we saw in the big dip last time. And also the market of hemp derived cannabis is out there. And I don't think how does that test when it's dry, when they have a certificate that says it tested wet at 0.0295, with Delta 9. So there's so much going on right now that's difficult. The one thing that I think you can bet for us is we know that these imbalances happen, as Graham said. It happens in a new market, and especially where it's just legal, illegal, and all the other nonsense that goes on. But for Glass House, just like, when I was, if you go on a run and you say, hey, it's the same run we always go on, and I start just jogging along, I can tell you the way my mindset has always been, if all of a sudden you try and trick me up and say, oh, now you're not in your comfort zone because you don't know how long this run's going to go. In my mind, I always go, good. This is the test I'm looking for. I want this test because that's the way that I'll always do better as a human being. And so I've sort of just conditioned myself to that. And so when it comes to the Glass House team, we've been through so many knife fights here in California. And it's been such a bad market to just try and grow and build a team into. I think it's just along the same thing, like Jensen Huang says the same thing. It's like, look, good, embrace the challenge, grow into the challenge. And so you probably saw, as much as we announced the pricing, we also announced that we put orders in and we are going full speed ahead on Greenhouse 2. So we're going to grow into it. No matter what happens, this aircraft carrier that we built is going to show up where it needs to show up on time, every time.
Yeah, I think we're worth remembering this is exactly the thesis that Glass House was built for, right? So it doesn't change our strategy. It reaffirms our strategy, right? Like, this is, in the big sense, what we predicted is that we would be able to grow the best weed for the least amount of money, i.e. the best value for the consumer, and that would consolidate the market. This is what the path to consolidation looks like. We've been through this. You'll remember, you're one of the people who does. Remember when we launched SoCal? Prices were the worst they'd ever been, and how many people said we're nuts, right? But what we thought, right? I'm not going to say we knew, but in general, we believed that it was going to take us some time to set up the greenhouse, plant the crops, harvest the crops, make the crops, ready for the sales guys to sell. By the time that happened, that this cycle would be at least partially played through, and that bringing on the most efficient facility that can grow the best weed for the least cost disconnects you from the pricing cycle, right? And same thing here, right? Prices are down and we're leaning all the way in the greenhouse too, because 12 months from now, when we're getting ready to sell that weed, we think a lot of this stuff is going to be behind it, and there will be a vacuum left behind from the damage that this may do. That is exactly what we'll expand into and fill.
Gotcha. And so I'm now hearing that things are stabilizing in Oregon and Michigan. It's now mid-November. I know you've given, if I were just to think about like the month to month, are you still seeing prices kind of come down? Do you feel like they're bottoming or flattening? Is there any kind of descriptive of how you see things now in November versus maybe in September?
Stable is a good word, I think. I would say that our perspective matches some of the other feedback that you're hearing.
Mark, what do you
great.
You're seeing the numbers come in real time.
Yeah, I think we are at that point where prices have stabilized, and if we see the historical pattern, we'll start to see improvement over the rest of the year and then, into the front half of next year. So we still believe we're going to see the kind of the cycle of prices are better in the front half of the year. And they're lower in the back half of the year. It's just right now that cycle has been amplified, given the factors Graham has, but we do expect prices will have kind of, let's say, stabilized, hit bottomish, and they should start to gradually improve through the rest of the year and into the first quarter of next year.
And do you guys expect there to be another drop in licensed cultivation capacity? Like, what would you estimate? And a better question is, what price do you think the average grower in the market needs just to sustain their business?
I'll share a quote that I heard from or read in an article. I think it was that they said at $300 a pound, they can't put food on the table. There was another quote in an article that said, "This is our last year and we're out." So I don't think that there's. I think the closest cost of production is probably 3x what ours was, and so I think it's your negative margins. Probably for most operators, anything under $400 is probably not a sustainable, worthwhile business.
And so, Aaron, the one thing I would just say, in looking back at when we saw the big decline starting in the second half of 2022, and we'll call it the first 6 months or so of 2023, and just looking at the raw data, I think one of the things that happened is a lot of the people left the market as a function of the lower pricing going back all the way to the summer of 2021, when prices really declined from June to July and they stayed low for like 18 months. So I think I look at this now and going, there's probably a year lag before we start to see a meaningful change in the number of licenses. So again, using limited history, I would expect we'll see some decline in the second half of next year, but probably not until then, because again, people are going to try to hang in there, maintain, keep their licenses alive, because that's where they keep the value. And then going back to Graham said, the decision about whether to plant next year and kind of March, April, May, that's when I think we may see people start to leave the market.
Gotcha. And the most amazing thing about the quarter you just announced was you basically met your guidance despite pricing being so much lower than you expected. And you made that up with biomass production. How did you end up producing 40,000 pounds more? That's a pretty large number. What were some of the contributing factors that allowed you to produce so much more cannabis?
Yeah, I think the team did a great job. Is the short answer. Part of it was that in our forecasting, obviously the first Q3, which is our biggest quarter, with Greenhouse 5 added into the mix with Greenhouse 6 and the 2 farms in Santa Barbara. So the forecasting we did on how much time it would take to have that kind of tidal wave of weed that was coming out peak season. Four production flower houses, with 2 in Camarillo and 2 in Santa Barbara, coming out, and the processing time that it would take to take the product that's harvested out of the greenhouse, dry it, trim it, cure it, QC it, get it to the salespeople. The processing guys, and also this also contributed to our lower costs, as the processing guys made some huge strides and improvements in their ability and efficiency to convert the harvested cannabis to finished goods that were available for sale. So some of that moved the product that we didn't expect to get to Q4 into Q3, which is also why you see this year a bigger delta between Q4 and Q3, as some of that just shifted forward by the good work that those guys did. And then also the team, Greenhouse 5 continues to work really well. The team continues to improve. Obviously, what goes along with that is $103 a pound in COGS, which is amazing. It will have higher COGS in Q4, but overall our guidance of 120 for the second half of the year, we will beat that. So I think the team is just making great progress as they continue to get more experience and we continue to scale up.
And so at the same time, though, flower as a percentage of the biomass was lower than expected. Why was flower so much lower, but you produced more biomass? And
So, yeah,
I would think, yeah, I'll ask my follow-up after you.
Yeah. So the flower percentage always seems to confuse people. So I'll try and explain it, right? Is a couple of things to keep in mind. One is we sell pounds, not percents. So the real thing to watch is how many pounds are there that we have to sell, not what percentage of it is there, right? It's a little bit like speed, and think of yourself in a car, how fast you're going and how long do you go for, right? So if I say I'm going 100 miles an hour, you don't know how long I'm going for, right? You need to know the time and the speed and the distance to know, right? And conversely, somebody that goes 50 miles an hour for 2 hours goes further than somebody who goes 75 miles an hour for 1, right? So think of the percentage. It really only matters if you think about it relative to the pounds, right? There's no scenario when if I said, hey, Aaron, as an investor, I can grow the same amount of flower, but I can grow twice as much trim. Do you want me to do that? Of course, right? Same amount of flower, twice the trim.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So if I grow the same amount of flower and twice the trim, the percentage of flower decreases, right? It goes from half and half to a third and 2/3. So the key is we grew a lot more of everything. Proportionally, we grew more trim, but we grew more of everything. So as a percentage, flower drops, but really, again, back to the beginning, we sell pounds, not percentages. So as long as there's more of everything, that's just a good thing.
So I guess what I want to
God, you are just smooth, Graham. That is so good.
I know, so good, so good. But if I wanted to try to understand, just long term, is there opportunity there in terms of getting that flower percentage higher, or is it just going to be variable? Like when I think about what I've always thought in terms of Q3 is because the weather, you have so much sunlight, the plants are more robust, you get more flower. So shouldn't seasonally a percent, or I'm just trying to think about, because the more flower you produce, the higher your ASPs, right?
Right.
Isn't that also a function?
It's yes, but it's the wrong question to ask, right? Like if you wanted to optimize the maximum flower percentage, how about this? How about I throw all the trim away? Flower percentage is going to be through the roof, but you're throwing away things that have value, right? So the goal is not to maximize a percentage. The goal is to maximize the pounds. We want the most pounds of everything. Of course, we would rather have more pounds of flower, but everything that has value, we want the most that we can give them. So as long as you're not trading, right? If I say, hey, I'm going to give up a pound of flower and give you a pound of trim, bad, right? It's about 20-1, right?
Yeah.
So yes, we want the most flower. Yes, we want the most smalls. Yes, we want the most trim. The one, if we could pick, of course, we want more flower, but as long as we are not losing on any of the categories, more the merrier.
And Aaron, just one, I think, and you alluded to it, I think one of maybe other than the $103 per pound from a cost of production, the 57% gross margin for wholesale for the quarter, given how low the average selling price was, is just indicative of how good the quarter was for wholesale, right? Just in terms of low cost, over 200,000 pounds sold, over 230, produced. It really was an outstanding quarter. And again, maybe one of the most difficult cannabis wholesale markets we've seen since the market has been legal recreationally in California.
No, that's very helpful. And going to that COGS, Graham, you've always said the long-term guidance was $100 a pound. Every now and then, I swear, in one of the calls, you were like, well, I think we might be able to get it lower. You got 103. You're only using 40% capacity utilization, which is just remarkable. Do you have any updated thoughts on where COGS could get? Are we reaching the limit of how low it can go? In other words, if you were to pour a lot more throughput through your system, can COGS get to like $90, $75? I'm just curious how you think about it.
Yeah, and so the 103 is awesome, right? And as Mark mentioned, you know, a huge piece of being able to bring back the margin and things like that, even in the challenging pricing environment, was the ability to produce at such an efficient rate. As you know, consistent with what we've always said, our goal is focus on the things we control: quality, cost, consistency. The pricing cycles are going to happen, but if we do it as well, if we're so far up on the quality side, so far to the left on the cost side, we're almost disconnected. We're almost in a different market, and our product will clear, people will want it, and everybody else can figure out what they do after that. So I think that's, you know, a real testament, and it's that strategy and thesis on display here this quarter. The $100 target is a year-round target, right? So Q3 seasonally is, you know, Q3 is probably the best, Q4, Q2, Q1, right? So our target is to get that number down, which means you're going to have quarters that are going to be under $100 to come out with a $100 year-round number. That said, I think we're making great progress. As you mentioned, we're only 40% of the way there. Every time we add scale, we're going to increase efficiency. I mean, you can think of all the fixed cost, security, property tax, insurance, all these things as we increase the denominator by growing more on a cost per pound basis, all those numbers drop, right? And more production is the only thing that drops cost per pound across the board. So making that denominator as big as possible. You were there at the analyst day, so I know you know, but we raised our fully built out target from 1.5 million to 1.6 million pounds. That's a 8% I think increase, which means correspondingly that's going in the right direction to bring COGS even lower. I think we're going to stick with our under $100 for now, but I don't imagine we'll stop when we get there.
So for the year, given Q4 guidance, we should finish around $128, $127 of cost, right, on a full year basis. Last year in 2023, it was $136. So, each year we're grinding away. Graham's team comes up with, a few additional ideas. It's just remarkable as they go, well, let's add, we can pick up 6 extra inches at the end of a gutter, right? And you heard that.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the kind of things that help grind away to get us to the $100 or under target. And I just think as we add, we'll continue to make similar improvements as we go forward.
No, that's great. So let's shift to interstate commerce, which is the opportunity to sell glasshouse flower outside of the state of California. And the best opportunity for that is hemp. Let's talk about hemp. We know the pricing is higher. We know the costs are lower. What have you learned since the analyst day about the hemp markets? What are your current thoughts on moving forward with the next greenhouse to produce hemp instead of cannabis?
I think, number one, appreciate the question, because that probably is our number one question we get asked, and is top of mind of everybody, especially given what we started this conversation with, which was the low pricing of cannabis in California. I think the way we're seeing it is it's optionality. The pricing is absolutely much better. I think you can expect as more people head to that market, that there will be some more pricing pressure. But we think, at least in the short term, at least let me put it this way, I think we're all still gathering information, separately and bringing it together. What I'm seeing is that even with a dip, I think we're still going to see that the pricing next year will be better in hemp-derived cannabis than probably even a nice rebound in California cannabis. So we do have our hemp license at Greenhouse 2. Graham has plants that we're testing out and we're playing with right now to see how things go. And so we're doing all the preliminary things that we would do in any brand new greenhouse. And right now, I would say the direction is hemp. We haven't made the final decision and the final announcement. And I would tell you that I think once we feel comfortable with a number of boxes we need to check, particularly for me, the one that I want to see is, as much as I think DTC will be popular, we need to have some wholesale distributors that can help us move a full greenhouse full of hemp-derived cannabis. And I think that at the end of the day will be the biggest deciding factor for us. We would ask the governor, given the fact that the pain is back in such a big way, two things. Governor of California, Mr. Newsom. Number one, mirror the cultivation and selling out of state, the law in the state of California to mirror the federal law. Get out of the way. Let the small growers, the big growers, let them participate. And number two, especially for the small growers, it keeps failing, and it's mind-boggling, is let them have farmers markets in the state of California, not for hemp, but for cannabis, so that the small farmer can still do that, but they can also switch to hemp-derived cannabis from California. I think there's going to be a huge market, which will bridge us to the time that we get descheduled and interstate commerce comes around.
Yeah, so a reminder, right? Part of the reason we're doing this is because it doesn't have a big cost to us and we maintain full optionality. We are 100% go, pedal to the metal on Greenhouse 2 expansion. There's 40 people in there. The orders have been placed. The greenhouse is being torn down to the studs, replicating what we've done in greenhouses 5 and 6, and actually and then some because it's a slightly older greenhouse. So there's no holding back on that. The optionality cost for us at this point is almost zero, because what we're doing is we have our hemp license, as Kyle mentioned. We have our first hemp plants. Those plants are now growing. We are going to test them. We'll go through the process. We'll understand how the hemp regulations work. We'll understand how the state of California interprets things. We're also watching at the same time the changes, and it's very dynamic. State of California is the operating state. Recipient states, be that Florida or Texas. Texas, on the one hand, there's people that say they want to regulate it and shut it down. On the other hand, there are people that say they want to legalize medical marijuana this year. The current way we sit here today, it's probably, it's 7,000 dispensaries to California's 1,000 dispensaries right now, just selling Farm Bill compliant hemp. Lots of interesting stuff happened at the federal courts. And then there's also the federal government, right? It sounds like there are bills being thrown around, but there's not a lot of consensus. So beautiful thing for us is we really don't need to decide probably until like sometime in Q2 when we decide which plants are we actually going to start off with in Greenhouse 2. And even then the optionality doesn't go away, right? So if we decide to do hemp and they change something, we'll just pivot back to what we've always done for the last 9 years and license cannabis. If there's not enough clarity yet and we do cannabis, and then the door opens up, the Trump administration's got a lot of folks in there with some very different opinions, arguably a cannabis dream team being assembled, or at least trying to be right now. So if that opens the door, then we can just pivot right back, right? The only cost to us would be a license that we might not use the full term on. That's really, and we'd only do it if it made economic sense. So the beautiful thing is what we are good at is growing great cannabis at scale consistently for the best price. And that does not care whether it is to a state licensed California regulatory regime or a federally licensed interstate commerce hemp regulatory regime. We are good at what we're good at, and we're going to do that and get to the customer by any means possible.
That's really smart. And just some of the stats that I saw, I'm sure you guys see this, but there are more smoke shops than any other form of retail in the US right now. Totally right. And then when you think about the opportunity for glasshouse, this is the whole,
something like that, right?
Yeah, it's some crazy number, but it's like the thing that really gets me is I'm hearing from the private markets in New Jersey that and you can see it in the retail prices, but there are flowers going for $3,500 to $4,000 a pound in New Jersey.
Crazy.
And meanwhile, that you have in, California, you can get glasshouse flower for what, like $500 a pound or some version of that in that rate.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Which I'm gonna say is better. The $600 a pound weed out here that we're growing is I'm gonna bet is
Yeah.
high.
So it's just, there's just these wild,
Right.
I actually think it's what's wrong with cannabis, and that we've had this incredible misallocation of capital. And I think a lot of the pain you're seeing from the multi-state operators is they're desperately trying to hold on to this limited license model. And it just doesn't work for anyone. It's like total chaos. It's managing chaos. You should have producers, you should have retailers, you should have brands. You might have some hybrids, but you shouldn't have this fully vertically integrated. It just doesn't really.
No.
Doesn't
Yeah,
this sort of remind you the current cannabis in the United States as like food production and sales in the Soviet Union in the 70s? You just
Well,
have these
I have no
crazy
experience.
imbalances, and there's a line over here and there's none over there. It's like, the hell is going on here? If they would just let us be the United States and let the 90% of people that wants it basically, end the war on cannabis and just let it happen. It's just utterly ridiculous. So eventually it'll happen. But as you were just mentioning, that's going to be a great opportunity for Grown Rogue. They're going to be in New
And
Jersey.
Glasshouse, and everybody who is used to competing in the hardest markets and has to find, I think one of the things you mentioned it, Mark and Graham, you told me on one of the tours, is like, how many cultivators are like, hey, we got 6 inches here to add an extra plant on this row, but we have all these rows, let's go add them. And I think but when you're forced to do that, because you have to lower costs, you got to keep your quality, and you've got to survive really low price environments. It requires you to just have very low costs and to constantly try to work at it. And I think that's part of the problem. Anyway, so we've talked about this before. I can go on and on.
The biggest ally when descheduling happens, you're probably going to have some of the MSOs try and fight to keep the status quo. The allies that get unleashed are convenience store retailers and gas stations. Because right now they're content to sit on the sidelines, take credit cards, do what they do, maybe be in a hemp game. But once they have an ability to go ahead and sell it and buy from anywhere, you can bet that all of a sudden they're going to get it. Their voices are going to get very loud, and their elbows are going to get nice and sharp because they're going to want a piece of this. And at that point, they become our biggest allies. And so it'll be very interesting to see what kind of deals can be cut. If the pricing is anywhere close to current in New Jersey, when the walls come down, stand by. Just stand by.
Yeah.
As you said, those that have just grinded it out in the knife fight are going to show up with their knives.
And it's also really helpful that you guys have the flexibility to go back and forth, because there really is a lot going on right now, and nothing's going to change. In fact, I think the House just came out and said there's not going to be any farm bill. It's going to be extension for another year. They're going to go at it next year. And so you're not going to see anything. But at some point, you're going to have a farm bill, and there's going to be one hell of a fight. It's a $1.5 trillion bill. Hemp is a small piece of it. It's going to be a big fight, and we'll see what happens.
But do you think maybe cannabis and hemp may even, as one of the possible scenarios, they sort of intersect?
I hope so. The easy one is just to say it's all hemp or it's all cannabis, and we're just going to regulate it.
Yeah, move it from 0.3 to 30. Move the decimal place over, a node or two, and it's done, right? I mean, the Wyden bill that's what it's trying to. It's going to get legalize cannabis by way of regulating hemp, which might actually, I mean, if you get Gates and you get RFK, I think you're going to see things.
We'll get into that in a second. Let's get to the other parts of your business real quick. We'll get into that. Your retail and CPG had a good quarter. And specifically, I feel like you're really starting to hone your retail strategy, and it's very clear in your retail stores. I walk past the pharmacy right here, and it's like 40% off every day.
And
Is
you
it
walked
just
past it,
simple?
it didn't draw you in?
I'm just saying, as I went to go get a coffee yesterday, I didn't walk in yesterday. I apologize. But is it just like everyday low prices? Is there something else going on in retail? Is it that you're just trying to increase the inventory turns? Like, what specifically is causing the glass house retail to outperform so dramatically? Because it started a quarter ago in Q2, I think, and now it feels like it's really diverging in Q3. What's going on?
So first of all, it really started at one store a little over 2 years ago. And that was the Pottery in
Okay.
Los Angeles, which is probably the worst cannabis retail market in the country. It's just, there's so much illicit there. It's just very difficult. And then there's a few chains out there that they have gone to the low price model. And we all sell basically the same thing. So you can't have Walmart and Nordstrom selling the same thing at different prices. Ultimately, it's all going to come here because the consumer is going to go, oh, I can get plus here and I can get plus here. Why would I spend this when I get this? So it was one of those things where we either could be proactive or reactive. And we chose first to be proactive in the pottery. And we saw an immediate, instead of doing this like the state is doing, that was what was happening in the pottery. Then we saw it do this and that. And it really was a big success. And then full credit to Halal Tapsh, Jen Berry, who oversees our retail. They really embraced it. They went out there and we just basically said, hey, if at our core, we want the best possible pricing for consumers, the best possible value, then this really fits our core values. And so we decided to do that. And we're very excited. I think between the market here and where we are, that was a 17.9% difference. And so we felt really proud of the performance, but even more so that people like yourself that are walking by and go, oh my God, look at the deal, might come on in there and choose our store, because why go down the street and get the same product for more? Why not come to us? And so, and also we were built where we try to be very smart about leases and things like that so that we can play that game. So yeah, that's basically, that's the story behind it.
Aaron, one other, again, we've talked about this the entire time I've been with the company, the power of being vertically integrated and selling our own brands in our stores. And we've certainly been able to capitalize on, the momentum Allswell has created working in our stores with, $9.99 out the door. And because we're capturing the entire value chain, right? And almost 30% of our revenue in our stores comes from our brands. We've seen a margin hit, but not nearly the margin hit you would expect by lowering the price, because we're still getting upwards of 60+% gross margins on the product we sell in our stores that we produce. So we've kind of got a hedge, and we've been able to drive again up almost to 30%. So that's allowed us to continue to bring the foots in and maintain good, I'm going to say good margins despite the discounting we've been doing.
Gotcha. That's great. And you've mentioned
One comment.
Go ahead. Sure. Go.
Connect the discussion we were having, and this is part of the reason that we've always said that we want to be the most consumed and loved brands in cannabis, not the biggest ingredient supplier, right? Is you've seen price compression, and net, we think it's good for the consumer that prices get more accessible. So probably we'll continue to see it, but you don't see 50%, 30% drop in price over a couple month period in CPG. You might have seen 25% price compression, but it happens over 2 years. And we're not really seeing, changes there. And to Mark's point as well, when we grow it and we sell it, the margins, whether it be DTC or in a retailer, the margins that we recognize are truly outstanding. And the more we drop pricing and our more we drop costs, the better those things get. So I think it's important to keep in mind that the long-term bet on CPG is starting to show some returns in the progress that we're making.
No, that's great. You've talked about potentially doing managed service agreements where you would run other people's retail store or do some version of that. Is that any more, is that closer to reality, or is that just something you continue to talk about?
So we're having a lot of discussions with different retailers, and to be clear, what we're not looking to do is to find the retailer that's going out of business, owes a lot of tax, that we think is just unfortunately an obsolete situation. And probably just, most cities have too many dispensaries, and then nobody does really well. And unfortunately, it's going to be just like cultivation. You're going to see some of those that just don't have the right location or too high of a lease or things like that go out of business. We're looking for strong stores that we can make stronger. And we think that that will increase our buying power, which is already very, very good. So you can imagine, as we saw this versus everyone else seeing this, we're selling a lot more volume. And so that really makes us attractive to brands to want to give us the best possible pricing since we pay our bills. But yeah, to your point, yes, and nothing to announce, but I'm optimistic that we'll have some good news.
Great. Shifting to just an unrelated topic. Mark, can you explain to me how 280E just goes away? Or how you can just be like, hey, we don't need to pay it.
Poof.
So
Yeah.
we've spent a large part of this year doing research, right? And looking at what other MSOs are doing, engaged outside tax counsel to help advise us. And without going too deep into the legal aspect of it, we looked at what the Farm Bill said in 2018, and we looked at what the HHS rescheduling recommendation said in 2023 when that first came out. And we concluded we have a strong position to basically say, given what the federal government is doing, that the 280E section of the tax code doesn't apply to cannabis, right? And there's some subtleties behind that. So again, based off of our due diligence and the advice of counsel, we decided to file 2023 taxes as though 280E didn't apply. It saved us a little over $6 million relative to what we would have paid if we had filed taxes consistently with 280E. We haven't yet gone back to, let's say, 2022 or prior years to ask for a refund. We thought, in essence, it's better for us to keep the money and then see how the debate plays out. And because we think we have a strong position, if ultimately we end up losing, we'll pay the taxes, but we should be able to avoid any form of a penalty that might come along with it. To be clear, we did end up paying taxes, just a lesser amount. So it's not as though we're not paying our taxes. We're paying taxes off of the new recalculated amount. And we'll continue to do it. I mean, the interesting thing is you have favorable momentum again coming out of Washington with if Gates gets confirmed, with Kennedy, and it still feels like it's a relatively pro-cannabis environment. So we just said now's the time to do it. We'd rather keep the money on our balance sheet than have the money go over and then be working to get a refund. So we'll just see where it goes, but we feel good about what we've done.
So going to that subject, actually, now this is what everybody's talking about. I actually thought it was a joke when it came out that that he was recommending Matt Gaetz, and I even made a joke online. I was like, the only person that I know is more pro cannabis than Matt Gaetz is Graham Farrar. And so, like, I'm still surprised. And RFK Jr. is head of HHS. These are the people that literally want to deschedule, not reschedule, but deschedule cannabis, and have been very vocal about cannabis. I'm just curious. I don't know if you have any people that you talk to who know of people in the incoming administration or around them, or just share your thoughts on, because there's still a lot of skepticism. One, that they'll even be end up being appointed or approved by the Senate, or who knows about reset, all that stuff. But like, it's very clear, like, people are skeptical whether things will happen with the Trump administration versus cannabis. I have my own opinions. I'm curious, Kyle, Graham, Mark, what are you guys hearing? What do you guys think from the Trump administration?
So I was told from some reliable sources that have been talking to Trump family and Trump transition that John Thune had agreed that if needed, he would use the recess appointments to get in some of the more difficult nominations. And some of those difficult nominations, like RFK, like Matt Gaetz, are very pro-cannabis. So for us, we just game theory how this affects Glass House as fiduciaries for the company, and we see those appointments as very positive. Before someone starts yelling at the screen that I don't care about horses or bears in Central Park, that I'm speaking as the chairman CEO of Glass House, and we think both those individuals would be very good for cannabis because they're on the record as being in favor of legalization. So that was what we were told. As you know, anything can happen, a scandal of this, there's always surprises. The other thing is Mission Green, where I sit on the board, we are very optimistic. We know that Mr. Biden has some decisions to make in regards to his own son. All four of us on this call are married and have at least one son. And we know that if faced with a very similar situation, if we want to stay married, you're probably going to pardon that one son. That's just going to happen. And so I don't see any which way, he's a dad, and I think that happens. I've also seen on some of the podcasts, some of the Trump family is suggesting that Donald Trump would pardon Hunter Biden as well. But Mission Green feels Donald Trump did some pardoning, including Weldon Angelos. And so he still is in the win column against Joe Biden's administration. We're hoping Joe Biden ups that game, takes the lead, and then Donald Trump comes in there with the right people in the DOJ to start just pardon all these nonviolent cannabis. And quite frankly, as a former member of, I'm still a member, but as a former speaker of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, nonviolent drugs, just end it. Just bad money being spent, get these human beings out of those cages and bring them home and let them restart their life.
Do you think,
let them go.
My common question at the end for you, Kyle, is around this prison reform. Do you feel you'll have greater opportunity to make change with the new administration versus the old, or what does Weldon think, or how do you think about in terms of just prison reform and getting non-violent?
Would it have possible to have been worse than the last one? I mean, they didn't do
I don't
anything.
think so. Looking back, I don't think it was possible.
I
I know we had the rescheduling review, but it was pretty painful.
Right. We asked you to look at this, and then we can't even get it done in before the election or even in the year. I mean, I don't know. I think I'm with you. I think this feels like a dream team, like from the cannabis, lens only.
Yeah, just solely from the cannabis lens. Let's just keep it at that.
Gaetz is out there multiple times saying that we should delist cannabis, that it shouldn't be scheduled. If anybody hasn't seen him grilling Ann Milgram, the head of the DEA, on why cannabis is still scheduled, why 2 years have gone by and no progress been made. You got to watch it. It's very clear what he wants. He wants it off the list. RFK, from again, cannabis lens, I'm not sure that I could agree more with somebody than what RFK has to say about cannabis. He says it should be federally legalized. He should have a low tax on it. He said we should take those taxes to fund rehab centers for opiates, and he thinks it could be a path to ending or at least improving and mitigating the opiate problem in America. Like, get people out of jails. He says that too. We're wasting taxpayer money. It's like, I don't know what more you want to say. If he is truly in charge of the HHS and the FDA is under him and the DEA is under Attorney General Gates, like, I mean, I just don't know a more rosy scenario than that if it actually comes to pass.
And I think, I don't want to speak for Weldon because, you know, he does a great job speaking for himself. That said, I would tell you that he and I share excitement about the potential here to work with the Trump administration and like any second term president. Now it's legacy time. And it gives him a big opportunity to build on what he did. You know, Harry O was the true founder of Death Row Records. And Snoop asked Weldon after Weldon was pardoned, is there something you can do? And Weldon brought it to the Trump family, who brought it to Donald Trump, and they worked it out. And in fact, Harry O was down at Mar-a-Lago on an election night. And so, yeah, I would love to see it. The one thing, and I know that this clip can be used against me in a bad way, but I had no idea how bad federal prison really is. When I was a police officer, I really was involved with federal area as someone who worked for, you know, in the state of California at a local department. But I will tell you, I literally had no idea. It's awful. When I talk to people in federal prison, and Jim Gray, who was a vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, is a good friend and also a member of LEAP. I mean, things need to change. This is not good. Most of these people are going to get back out. Let's rehab them. Let's not torture them. I mean, this is out of control bad. And also, again, this is going far afield, but I'll just make one comment. I love Marriott. I love private hotels. Private prisons is absolutely insane because Marriott will incent me to stay. They'll give me a free breakfast to stay another night. They're not going to give me a demerit to keep me in for their benefit at the cost of my freedom. That is not America. And the more you talk to these folks, and Parker Coleman said that amongst other things in rebuilding his life was to speak out about this and to try and bring some prison reform. And we're hoping President Trump will be open to it. And I know Weldon is just full of vigor and ready to go. So yes, very excited.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, as always. This is fantastic. I learned a lot. I'm really excited about the next year. Obviously, we could have tremendous change on the federal level or nothing, or we could see hemp or not. But it will be fascinating because I continue to believe that your model, what you're trying to do in terms of driving down costs so consumers can get the lowest prices possible, the best quality cannabis at the lowest price. I think that's the future. And thank you so much.
Did this make you as happy and excited as your time on Saturday with the Tennessee Georgia?
No, come on,
no man. That's
no. We need federal reform for that to happen. Then I'll lose my voice again.
I can't wait for that to happen. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
As always,
Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks a lot, Aaron.
Thanks.
See you guys.